Alright, hi everyone. I hope you guys are doing well. So this video is for the week of April 6th, so we're going to be talking about commitment. You'll also see the slides might be labeled as interdependency, but I'm kind of using those terms both for this chapter. There is an activity that's going to be due by Friday at 5 p.m., so it's going to be due by April 10th. However, this is activity 11. So remember that there are 12 activities total, but I'm going to be dropping your two lowest activity grades. So that means if you've done activities 1 through 10, then you already have the maximum 100 points for activities. And if you want to do 11 and 12, you can, but there wouldn't be any benefit to your grade to do so. However, if you've missed one of the activities, maybe you have 9 activities so far, then you could just do 11 or 12. Or if you've missed 2 or more activities, then it would benefit you to do activities 11 and 12. So let me know if you have any questions about that. So this week we're talking about chapter 6, and then our last lecture video for next week will be about maintaining and repairing relationships. These slides might be labeled staying together, but you'll see those on Canvas. After that, we'll be done with the material for the class. So we'll have exam 4. Exam 4 is going to open at 8 a.m. on April 13th, and it'll be open until 5 p.m. on April 21st, so plenty of time to take that. Once exam 4 closes, or as soon as possible after you take exam 4, I'm going to be posting your grade in the class before the final exam. If you're happy with that grade, you can keep it. Remember that in this class you do get 1 drop grade for exams. So many of you will probably keep the grade that you had after exam 4 and not complete the final exam. But for some of you, maybe you missed an exam or didn't do as well on an exam, and exam 5 could potentially help you. I'm going to drop your lowest exam grade. So if you take all 5 exams, I'll just drop whichever one is your lowest score. Okay? Which means that the final exam cannot hurt you unless you cheat on it. So if you cheat on it, if you plagiarize, then it could hurt you. But other than that, it can't. If you take all 5 exams and exam 5 ends up being your lowest exam, I'll just drop it. So exam 5 is also the final exam. It's going to be a little bit different from the other exams. I haven't decided the exact way I'm going to do this since we're not doing this in class anymore, but there'll be some essay questions for you to choose from, and you'll be completing those questions. So I'll let you know more about that when I decide on exactly how I'm going to do this. I might have you do it in Canvas, or I might have you do it and then email it to me. I'll let you know as soon as I get that figured out. Okay? So as always, let me know if you have any questions. I hope you guys are doing okay. I hope quarantine is going as well as possible for you. Alright, so this chapter is on interdependency. We are also going to be talking about commitment, so in the syllabus I had this labeled as commitment. Really what we're going to be talking about in this set of slides is what makes us more or less committed to our relationship, what makes us more or less dependent on our partners. So remember that the last section of the class is intended to be a little bit of a pick-me-up. The third section was about stresses and strains and breaking up and all of that. This last section, we talked about communication. We're going to talk a little bit today about things that can cause us to be more committed, and then we'll finish up talking about staying together. So one thing we have to think about when we're talking about whether or not we're committed to our relationship and how dependent we are on it is what kind of rewards are we getting from our relationship. It sounds a little bit cold to think about it this way, but it's true that we don't usually stay in relationships unless we get some sort of reward from them. We might not say that's the reason I'm staying. We might say, well, I'm going to be your friend because I care about you. I'm going to be your partner because I love you. But we do expect that we will get some benefits from being in a relationship. So this process is social exchange. The idea that we receive benefits from our partner, and then also, ideally, we give benefits to our partner as well. Now, if we're thinking about these rewards and costs, there are lots of different examples we could discuss. And this is always an interesting conversation in past semesters when I've been able to have this conversation with students. So obviously rewards are going to be the good things in a relationship, the things that cause us to feel happy and fulfilled, versus the costs, the things that are difficult in relationships. When I start asking students to give me examples of each of these though, usually students give me, I don't know that I want to, what term should I use here? They usually have a hard time giving me rewards. it seems like it shouldn't be that hard. But when I ask students, like, what kinds of good things do you get out of a relationship? I usually hear crickets for a minute. And then I hear things like insurance, Netflix passwords. I mean, really, literally, this is the kind of thing that I've heard in the past few semesters. And then finally, after a couple of painful minutes of that, somebody will say love, I guess. So I hope that you're able to think of some rewards that you can get from having a close relationship, which doesn't necessarily have to be romantic, but maybe some additional rewards perhaps for a romantic relationship. But the intimacy that you get, having a person be a witness to your life, right? I picked that up somewhere from some book. But the idea that you have a person who is always there for you day in, day out, there are a lot of rewards that go along with that. But we would not be realistic if we didn't also acknowledge the fact that there are costs as well. So there are things you give up, right? You give up some freedom. You have to give up some personal choice, letting your partner choose what you're going to eat for dinner or what movie you're going to watch or what you're going to do. You have to compromise. You have to give up money. You have to contribute to that. There are lots of things that we lose when we're in a relationship. But if we look at a relationship and we say, I feel like the rewards outweigh the cost, we'll say this is a happy relationship, I want to be here. If we feel like the costs outweigh the rewards, that makes it harder for us to be committed to that relationship. But of course, it's not as simple as this, okay? If we only look at the rewards and costs, we have this formula here, which we do, to a certain extent, have a formula here, where we take the rewards, what are the good things we're getting? We think about the costs, we take those out, and we say, all right, now what is my outcome? Okay? If my rewards outnumber my cost, I feel committed and satisfied, ideally. It may even be that you say, well, I'm getting more rewards than costs, but I think I could do even better elsewhere. So more on that coming up. On the other hand, if you feel like the costs are too high, then you might decide to leave, or perhaps before you decide to leave, try to make some changes in the relationship. And this is where I would say, therapy and communication and all those answers, right? However, it's not necessarily just a simple formula, because there may be some costs that you can't live with. Maybe you have tons of rewards and there's only one cost, but it's a cost you can't have. You cannot put up with this particular cost. There's something here that's too much that you can't deal with it. Or it could be that you have lots of rewards, but there's a reward that you need that you don't have, and you feel like you have to go elsewhere to find it or try to change the relationship you're in to get that reward. So of course it's not entirely a simple formula. It's hard for us to have a formula in this class. Interdependence theory, which is part of where the term interdependency comes from for this set of slides, suggests that we evaluate our relationships with two things. One, what do we expect from our relationships? And two, how well do we think we can do with other partners? First of all, what do we expect from our relationships? There are lots of things that go into this. Maybe past experiences, maybe watching other people's relationships. I think a lot of this goes back to your attachment styles. We talked about how attachment styles develop from our early relationships with our caregivers, and that attachment styles teach us whether or not we can trust other people, whether or not we are valuable, and that we deserve people to treat us well. So our expectations in relationships will in part dictate our views on cost and rewards. Am I getting everything I need from this relationship? Are the costs appropriate? But in addition to that, we also start to wonder how well we could do with other partners. This is where things get tricky, because we don't really know, do we? Unless you're currently having a relationship with multiple partners. It's hard for you to know what it would be like. Maybe you're in a committed relationship. You're considering another person that maybe you'd rather be in a relationship with. You don't really know what it would be like to be in a relationship with that person, right? The grass is always greener on the other side. That tends to be the American way of thinking here. So I would encourage us to be cautious. Many times we get into a new relationship and things seem better for a little while because there's all the excitement and things at the beginning, but the problems that were there before in previous relationships will probably come up again. Passion is probably going to decline again. Satisfaction is going to go down, as we'll talk about later. So let's be cautious thinking that the magic answer is to find a new partner, because that may not be the case. Now, if we're thinking about relationships in light of the benefits and the drawbacks, we need to also think about how culture has changed, and that changes in culture have impacted our benefits and drawbacks to relationships. So first of all, it talks here about women working. And this has been a theme. We've mentioned this a few times throughout the class. The idea that women working outside of the home is different from previous generations and that it impacts relationships. One thing to think about here is that in the past, women might have felt like a benefit for them came from being in a relationship with someone who would provide for them, because women may not have felt able to provide for themselves. But now, women working outside of the home more often makes it where a woman might feel like she doesn't need that benefit as much. Another way of thinking about this is that the cost of leaving a relationship might not be as high for a woman now because she feels like she has the ability to provide for herself. People being mobile. So if you don't like the situation you're in right now, there are a couple of different things you could do. One, you could say, okay, I'm going to stay here, I'm going to figure out how to fix it. Or you could say, I'm going to leave and try a new situation. People are able to move more often. People are able to find additional partners more often. So now we have access to more partners. And this leads us to that thought about we'll do better with another person. If we feel like there are many different people out there that we could potentially be in relationships with, we're likely to believe that there's probably someone who will give us more rewards than we're getting in our current relationship, which may or may not be accurate. And then finally, it talks here about the legal and social barriers to divorce. So in the past, there have been costs associated with divorce. And I think we would say there are still costs today. There's still stigma. There's still legal difficulties, especially if you're figuring out splitting up debt or custody of kids, that kind of thing. But it is easier today to get a divorce, and it's more socially acceptable today to get a divorce. So perhaps because of that, the costs of leaving a marriage have decreased. When you think about that, we really shouldn't be surprised that our divorce rate is increasing steadily, as the benefits of marriage perhaps have been decreasing somewhat, and the cost of leaving marriage have also been decreasing. It would make sense for us to have a higher divorce rate. So then a question might be, how could we combat this? There's not really anything that we can do about a lot of these changes. We have to try to find ways to increase the rewards of being married. We have to find ways to value marriage more and to be more committed to our marriages. Okay? So perhaps that means that we're having to work harder in our marriages than previous generations have because of changes, you know. I think each generation faces its own struggles. So when we're talking about weighing the good and the bad in a relationship, I said that this is complicated because there could be some costs that you're just not willing to put up with, or some rewards that you're not willing to live without. But it's also complicated by the fact that cost is more influential than benefit. Okay? If you look at your list, I don't know if you've ever made a pros and cons list, especially if you ever made a pros and cons list about a person, but you can't say, okay, well, I've got 5 good things and 4 bad things, so I think I'll marry this person. That's not really the way that it works, because the bad is stronger than the good, basically because it's going to carry more psychological weight. So imagine that you've had a day where everything has gone well, but this one thing went wrong. And then you're talking to your partner, your friend, your roommate, your family member. The thing you're probably going to tell them about is going to be the bad thing. The thing that sticks out in your mind when you're laying in bed at night trying to go to sleep is the bad thing. This is true for our relationships too. Our partners may do kind things for us, nice things for us all day long, but they say one thing that's hurtful, and that's the thing we remember. That's the thing that sticks out. I think there are lots of reasons why this could be. I think one thing specifically with relationships is that it goes against our expectations. We expect our partners to treat us well. And I want you, don't misunderstand me, I want you to expect your partners to treat you well. But when our partners do something nice for us, we say, oh, well, yeah, that's good. But you're supposed to do that. That's what boyfriends, girlfriends, husbands, wives, whatever are supposed to do. And so we don't give them as much credit for the good things they do. But then when a partner does something that hurts us, we think, okay, you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to speak to me that way. You're not supposed to hurt my feelings. So, and I agree, you're not supposed to do that. But I think we tend to focus on the negative things, and then we don't give our partners credit for the good things that they do. But this is not just for relationships. In general, this is the case. And one way they do research on this question is asking people about gambling, actually. I mean, really, if you just boil it down to it. If I said, okay, I've got a coin. If I flip this coin, if it's heads, I'll give you $100. If it's tails, you give me $100. Now, some of you adrenaline junkies might say, yeah, sure, absolutely, I'll do that. And this is an example. I'm not offering that. But what I'm saying is most people will not do that. Most people will say that risk is too high for them. Even though the risk and the reward are equal, right? I put equal in air quotes here. You can't see my quotations. But the idea is that we say, all right, well, technically, yes, I win $100 or I lose $100. But losing $100 seems like a much bigger deal than getting $100. So when they narrow that down a little bit, they find that rewards need to outnumber costs by at least 5 to 1. That means the bad is 5 times stronger than the good. So if I said, okay, heads, I'll give you $100, tails, you give me $20. People will usually do that. That seems like a good guess. That seems like a good thing to do. But the idea here then in relationships is that we need to do at least 5 good things for our partner for every one time we mess up, just to maintain the status quo. And then if we want our partner to be especially happy, we need to do more than 5 things for every one time we make a mistake. That's so much pressure in a relationship, especially because perhaps we want to reward our partner, but we don't know how to take care of them perhaps. Or we want to avoid hurting our partner, but sometimes we don't know how to do that. So I think that this is true. This is human nature. We tend to focus more on the bad things. I think we need to be open and honest with our partners about what kinds of things bother us when it's a little thing before it becomes too big, because we know that these costs are really detrimental to relationships. Another way to think about this is, what if you found out that your teacher had changed your grade and you had gotten 10 extra points versus lost 10 points? I think you would say that having someone take 10 points away from you would be a much stronger emotion than having someone give 10 points to you, right? We tend to focus on the negative, which, if we're not cautious here, can lead us to having depression, anxiety, a lot of unfortunate situations. All right. And as always, if you guys have any questions or comments on any of this, feel free to let me know or say so in your activity. Okay. So we'll have an activity this week. All right. So when we're talking about rewards and costs, another thing that complicates this situation is that rewards and costs are different things. So when it talks about gaining positive outcomes, we're talking about getting our rewards here. This is an approach motivation. We want to approach these positive outcomes. We want to try to gain rewards. So we want to gain the love, the intimacy, the commitment. We want to have the quality time, all the things you get from a relationship. But we also want to avoid the negative outcomes. This is an avoidance motivation here. I want to avoid the conflict. I want to avoid losing my personal freedoms. I want to avoid losing money, etc. Now, the thing that makes this complicated is that these are 2 different processes, which means that in some relationships you may find that you can gain the positive, but you can't avoid the negative. And so you have both. A relationship where I have lots of things that make me happy and lots of things that make me frustrated at the same time. Or you might fail to get the good stuff, but you might be able to avoid the bad things. So you're like, well, I don't really get anything good from this relationship, but I don't get anything bad either. I just feel kind of stagnant here. So because you can have cost and rewards at the same time, this makes things complicated. It talks about pleasure resulting from fulfilling our approach goals. Whatever it is that we want from a relationship, the benefits that we want, whether that be love and intimacy or a Netflix password. I have seriously had students, when I ask them, what rewards do you get from a relationship? They're like, Netflix password, insurance. Okay, whatever it is you're trying to get out of a relationship, no judgment there. You get pleasure from that. But then it hurts when you're not able to avoid the bad stuff. And if you have both of these things at the same time, it makes things really complicated. If we were in class, I would ask you, what relationships come to mind when I talk about this? Maybe we could talk about movies, for example. And I'm sure a lot of you could come up with some really good examples, but I know somebody would say The Notebook, right? So you think about this couple that seems to adore each other and they want to be together all the time, but they also fought like cats and dogs, right? So if we're in that situation where we have a relationship that has its happy moments and its dramatic moments, then do we stay for the happy moments or do we leave because of the dramatic moments, right? So we have a chart here that's kind of showing us what's happening. In this particular situation, we have our approach goals are fulfilled, so we're able to get the good things. But our avoidance goals are thwarted, so we're not able to avoid the bad things. This is a relationship that's full of delights and dangers. You've got the rewards, but you've also got the costs. And so this could be precarious. At any particular moment, those costs could feel like they're outweighing the benefits, especially because costs are so powerful, right? Here, we have a situation where your avoidance goals are thwarted, so we're not able to avoid the costs, but your approach goals are also thwarted, so we're not able to get the rewards. This is a situation where I'm full of negative things that I don't like about the relationship, and I can't think of very many good things, okay? This is a distressed relationship, okay? Over here, we have a situation where we are able to avoid the bad things. So there's nothing really bad going on, but we don't have much going on that's good either. This is a boring relationship, okay? And maybe you think about that couple that's been together for a really long time, and maybe they don't seem happy with each other, but they're comfortable with each other, that kind of thing. Now, okay, here's where we want to be, right? The ideal situation. We want to have our approach goals fulfilled, so we're getting the good stuff. We also want to have our avoidance goals fulfilled, so we're avoiding the bad stuff. This is a flourishing relationship. Now, here's the uncomfortable truth. This is where you want to be. You won't be here all the time, okay? Let's be realistic. If you're going to be in a long-term relationship, you may very well go through all of these periods. And there may be a time where you go through all these periods in the same month or the same week, okay? Perhaps we would do better to think we want to be here as much as we can, but not have the unrealistic expectation that we will always be here, okay? Relationships will go through difficult times. Then my question might be, when would you ever stay if you were here? If you were in a situation where the costs were high and the rewards were low, would you ever stay? And maybe you might say yes. Maybe my partner is going through a hard time, a psychological problem, a physical problem, maybe a loss of job. Like, man, guys, have grace with the people that you're around these days. This is a hard time, right? Coronavirus and quarantine, it's a hard time, right? So maybe we might say during this particular period, I'm willing to stay even though things aren't great, hoping that once this period has passed, we can go back to having a better relationship, okay? Also, I think that goes back to our previous conversation about permanence versus permanence with exceptions versus permissive, right? Okay, now this ties into your activity for this week, which a few of you have already done. Some of you went ahead, and that's perfectly fine. So what we're talking about here is the fact that satisfaction is going to change in relationships. In the past, in this class, we've had panel discussions. And I unfortunately had to not do that this semester because I have so many students, too many students for me to do that with. The class sizes have doubled and tripled. But one suggestion that I used to get from students in the past is it would be really great if we had a panel discussion with happily married people. And could we ask them what made their relationship successful? What hard times have you gone through, and how did you get through those hard times? My response to that is always, yes, that would be fantastic, but where would we find those people? It's hard to find couples that have been happily married for a long period of time. So here, what we're saying is that if you were to have a couple in your life that you look up to and say, hey, you guys have got this figured out, and then ask them, have you gone through hard times? If they're being honest with you, they will almost certainly say yes. Every couple goes through hard times. And what we're going to find is that there's a correlation here. The more dependent you are on each other, the more stress that can introduce into the relationship. So just about everyone is going to find that their relationship satisfaction is going to decline over time. It talks here about predictable changes in satisfaction. How do we know this? We take couples, we follow the same couples over a long period of time, so we can do longitudinal research. We can ask them, how happy are you before they got married, or right after they got married, or years after they've been together? typically what we're going to see is that satisfaction is going to decline. Now, this is coming from self-report because there's not really any other way to do this kind of research. And of course, there are going to be flaws with self-report, but overall, we tend to see people saying that satisfaction goes down over time. Now, a few things to think about when we look at this graph. One thing, it's from 1999. Wow, that's a long time ago, right? So that's one thing to think about, although I don't imagine this has changed a whole lot. Now, also, be cautious whenever you look at a graph like this. You've heard about lies, damn lies, and statistics, okay? So here, this could be creating an artificial difference here. I mean, the differences in the scores are from like 123 to 121. That's not a huge difference here, but if you get a large sample size, that could make this difference statistically significant, okay? But what we do see is that at almost every point here, and this is over 10 years, which I suppose 10 years is a long marriage now, over 10 years, first of all, the wife, now this is looking at heterosexual relationships, so it could be interesting to see how we might have different answers here in gay and lesbian relationships as well. But in this particular situation, the wife reported being happier on average with the relationship. This is marital satisfaction, happier with the relationship than the husband. And so there could be some potential reasons why this might be. Maybe women have higher expectations and all these things. I don't know. But one thing that we do see is that they decline pretty steadily for both of them, and that they end up being, after about 10 years, in about the same place, and lower than they were when they started, okay? This is the average couple. And so there's two things to take from this. One, if this happens to you, you're not weird. There's nothing wrong with you. This is what typically happens. But another thing to think about is, how can I try to not have this happen? Or how can I reduce this decline, perhaps? And that's really what I want you to be thinking about for activity 11. First of all, why does marital satisfaction go down over time? Why is it that couples that initially seemed happy have started having more problems the longer they're together? And then what could be done to prevent this decline? Is there something that one partner could do? Is there something that both partners could do that would help benefit marriage? Is there something we could do as a culture to help marriages be happier? And if we could figure that out, I think we'd go a long way towards preventing some divorces, okay? Now, I just want to reiterate what I said at the beginning, that you do get 2 activity drop grades. So if you've gotten credit for activities 1 through 10 and you decide to skip 11 and 12, that won't hurt you at all, okay? But if you've missed an activity or 2, this is a chance for you to get some of those points back. Email me if you have questions. Or if you just want to complete it, even if you've done the other ones, you just want to let me know how you think, that's perfectly fine, okay? All right. A few reasons your textbook talks about as far as why people tend to be less satisfied over time. One thing, lack of effort. And I feel like I might have mentioned this in class, but it's been so long since we've been together in class, I don't even remember. But there was some celebrity that was quoted as saying that she thought that sweatpants were the #1 cause of divorce. Which, now that we're in quarantine, I don't know, if you guys want to tell me what percentage of time you're spending in sweatpants and pajama pants, is probably more than average. What we're saying here, though, is it's not necessarily sweatpants, okay? I'm currently wearing sweatpants. But what we're saying is that people stop trying as hard as they once did. So towards the beginning, you're trying to start the relationship. And then once you start the relationship, you're trying to maintain that relationship to get to a certain level of commitment, right? We want to be engaged, we want to be living together, etc. At a certain point, though, perhaps we feel like we've already established the relationship, so we don't need to work as hard as we once did. Perhaps it would be a good thing to bear in mind that with a 50% divorce rate, we shouldn't get overly comfortable. I want you to be comfortable, but we shouldn't be overly comfortable to say, okay, I don't have to do anything anymore because we're already married. I think we should be encouraged that if we continue to put in the effort, then we don't necessarily have to have that drop-off in satisfaction, or it doesn't have to be as significant of a drop-off, right? Other things, the longer you're together, the more dependent you are on each other probably. As the commitment increases, as you are maybe living together, having joint checking, paying bills, raising children, or whatever, you're going to see that you need each other more. And when you need each other more, it makes things harder in some ways. It makes things better in a lot of ways too. But conflict is more consequential, right? Now we're having not just hypothetical discussions about the way we think kids should be educated. Now we literally have kids in front of us that have to be educated, right? We're not having hypothetical conversations about how we think we'd spend our money. Now there's this bill that has to be paid. We've got to figure out how to pay it. So the more you depend on each other, the more you have to think about your partner in every decision that you make. And that can cause conflict to happen more frequently. Remember that conflict is a time when your opinions or your motives or behaviors or goals or whatever are not lining up with those of your partner. The more you need each other, the more opportunities there are for conflict, which once again does not have to be a bad thing. We talked about ways to handle conflict and how it can build up intimacy. But if you're having conflict frequently, it gets harder and harder to manage that in a good way. Also, it talks about access to weaponry here. This could be intentional or unintentional. But the more you know your partner, the more you know about the things that hurt them, past experiences they've had, insecurities that they have. So, if your partner says something that taps into an insecurity, that hurts more than if a casual acquaintance does. You care about your partner's opinion. That's part of it. But also, your partner knew better. You knew that was going to hurt me. You knew about my past relationships, or you knew about this experience that I had. And so because of that, we have to be very cautious. Whenever our partner is vulnerable and they share something with us, they are giving us access to this information that we can use to build them up, or we can use to tear them down. And sometimes this is accidental, and we just have to beg forgiveness. We didn't mean it the way it sounded, that kind of thing. But also, when you're in the middle of a heated argument, please remember that that weapon that you have that would cause you to win that argument is probably not worth pulling out. The cost that comes from using that to hurt your partner is probably much higher than whatever temporary benefit you get from feeling like you won the argument. Okay? Other things, it talks about unwelcome surprises. This is where, if we were in class, I would ask you, can you really know someone until you've lived with them? So maybe you tried to move in with a best friend and that went poorly. Maybe you moved in with a partner and that was harder than you expected. Because there are just some things you won't know about a partner until you live together, or until you're sharing money, or until you're raising kids together, that kind of thing. Which, speaking of kids, it talks about unrealistic expectations. And we've touched on this a lot this semester, and there are tons of ways that we have unrealistic expectations. But can I just mention one here? Sometimes couples think, well, let's just have kids, and then that'll fix things, because then babies are cute and we can bond. Now look, as a mother of 3 children, I can confirm that babies are cute, especially my babies, and that they can bond your relationship. Okay, absolutely. But I also want you to think about what it would be like if you are exhausted, it feels like you haven't slept in years, you're covered in another person's bodily fluids. I'm talking about the baby here, okay? Think about the difficult things too. I am not trying to discourage you. If you want to have kids, that's fantastic. All I'm saying is that it can be a trying time on a marriage to have a baby. So just bearing that in mind, don't assume that if you're having problems that having a baby will be like hitting the reset button. I mean, it might, but it might not. Just be aware of that. Now, I told you guys that the 4th section of the class was going to be more positive, and yet it still seems pretty depressing. I'm not trying to depress you. The idea is that if you know what happens to most relationships, you can use this information to A, normalize your experience. You're not the only one who's having problems, but B, try to make changes that could be beneficial long term. Okay, so take this class and then send your significant others to take this class. If they're students in Mississippi State, I'd be happy to teach them as well. All right, so if we're talking about interdependency, needing each other, we have to think a little bit about the ways we serve our partners and the reasons why we serve our partners. Okay, so we could debate, and if we were in class, I would ask your thoughts. Are we ever really altruistic? In other words, are we ever really doing something strictly for the good of another? Let's say that you do something kind for your partner. You buy your partner an unexpected gift. Okay, now, you might say, I love my partner, and that's why I bought that gift. Good, fantastic, I'm glad. But could you also say, yes, but if I give my partner a gift, my partner will be happy with me, and that's a benefit for me. My partner will be happy in general. My partner might buy me a gift back. My partner might do something else kind for me. Okay. Now, usually students will argue that it is possible to really be selfless in doing something. They might say, like, what about people who volunteer? Okay. What do you get? Let's say you go volunteer at an animal shelter. What do you get out of that? Well, you get to feel good about yourself. I'm a good person. Maybe you get to put this down on your resume. Maybe you get to play with puppies. I mean, you get something out of that. You donate money to a charity and they send you something that you can put up a sticker like, hey, I donated to the Save the Tigers or whatever. The idea is that you get something from most good things that you do. We really live in one big token economy. Operant conditioning, we get reinforced for doing good things. We get punished for doing bad things. Not always, but in a lot of situations. So then, does that matter? If you say, okay, yeah, fine, I did something good for my partner because I wanted my partner to be happy with me and do something good for me. Does that really matter? I did something good for my partner. Does it matter why I did? Yeah, I'm going to argue that it does. I'm going to argue that if the reason you do good things for your partner is so that your partner will do good things back, what if your partner doesn't do something good back? Does that mean you're going to stop doing good things for your partner? Okay. And I wish we were in class where we could have these conversations, but I hope you guys are doing well, taking care. Now, when we think about doing things for our partner and having our partner do things for us, you might say, well, yeah, of course, that's a good thing because that is a fair situation. So when we talk about equitable relationships, we're talking about a situation where the effort and the work you're putting in are equal to the effort and the work your partner's putting in. And the contributions your partner's getting are equal to your contributions here. Okay. So once again, we have our semblance of a formula, which, you know, in relationships don't always work out. But what we're saying is you expect your outcomes and your contributions to be roughly equal to the outcomes and contributions of your partner. Now, that means that if that's the case, your relationship is equitable, it's fair, it's balanced. And a relationship that's fair and equitable and balanced is stable. This is a relationship where partners are most likely to be happy and least likely to break up. However, this is complicated. How do you know that your relationship is equitable? Do you and your partner have to be doing 50-50 of everything? Like, I washed half the dishes, you wash half the dishes. That's probably not the way it's working out. So then, what if one partner is working outside of the home and the other partner is staying home and taking care of the kids in the house? Who worked harder? Well, it depends on what you did at work all day and what kind of, like, I've known kids I would not babysit for $1 million. Okay, love my kids. But I've known other kids that I would not. But the point is, how do you know that your relationship is really equitable? And what if you don't agree? What if one partner thinks that it is equitable and the other partner does not? Well, a few thoughts on that. First of all, if a relationship is inequitable, so it's not fair, that means we have one partner that's over-benefited and one partner that's under-benefited. So there's one partner that's getting too much of the rewards and not putting in enough costs. On the other hand, we're going to have another partner that's not getting the rewards and then bearing too much of the cost. Now, we're going to talk about being under-benefited in a second. I think we would all say that we don't want to be here. We don't want our partner to be receiving all the good stuff, and we don't want to have to do all the work. I get that. But then my question to you is, do you want to be over-benefited? Do you want to be the person who's receiving all the good stuff and not putting in the effort? Now, occasionally I will have a student say, yeah, that sounds pretty good. But usually that's not what my students say. At least that's what we don't say out loud because of, social desirability. But if we think about this, why is it a problem to be over-benefited? Maybe we say, I would feel guilty if I was over-benefited. Maybe you say, I care about my partner, so I don't want my partner to go through that. Maybe you say, it's no fun living with an angry person, and my partner will probably be unhappy if he or she is under-benefited while I am over-benefited. Is there ever a time where you feel like this would be okay? Going back to my question earlier, maybe you might say, okay, I'm willing to be under-benefited right now because my partner needs extra. My partner is sick. My partner is having some kind of psychological stress. my partner's had a loss in the family or an issue at work or whatever. And so during that particular time, you're willing to be under-benefited and have your partner be over-benefited with the assumption that later, when you're having a hard time, your partner will be under-benefited and allow you to be over-benefited. But it's distressing, I would think, it would be distressing to be either. I don't want to be over-benefited or under-benefited. But it's especially distressing to be under-benefited when you feel like your partner doesn't value you enough to put effort into the relationship. It goes back to that perceived relational value. So what are some things we can do to try to restore the equity? Well, one thing we can do is try to restore actual equity. So if we have the work I'm doing and the work you're doing, and they're not the same, then I could try to make them the same. I could try to get you to work more, or I could work less. I don't know if you've done the passive-aggressive thing with the dishes yet. If you haven't, have you even really lived with anyone? I am tired of washing the dishes all the time, so I'm just going to leave the dishes in the sink and see how long it takes for you to wash them. Okay? So we can do that. I'm not saying that's the best thing to do, but we could do that. But also, whenever your partner does something positive, reinforcing them for that, praising them for that kind of thing, asking your partner to help you, right? Just letting your partner know what you need. You could try that. You could also try psychological equity. So what we're saying here is convince yourself that the relationship is equitable. Now this sounds bad, but hang with me for a second. Maybe it really is. Maybe the relationship really is equitable. Maybe you have not been valuing the work your partner's doing. Okay? Sometimes people look at a stay-at-home parent and say, oh, what do you do all day long? Oh, it's hard. It's really hard, okay? So maybe we're looking on the contributions of another person and saying, you're not really doing that much. Maybe we should check and make sure that we're giving them credit, okay? But maybe it's a situation where it's really not equitable, but you want to feel like it is because you want to be happy again. You might convince yourself that your partner is doing more than he or she really is, or you might undervalue yourself. I would encourage you to be cautious here. But maybe you haven't been doing enough. But maybe you say, look, what I'm doing is not that hard, okay? This is all situation specific. Sometimes people are working really hard and they don't give themselves enough credit, and that can cause burnout. So I'm not encouraging that. But sometimes we tend to tell ourselves we're working harder than we really are. So let's just check in on that and make sure that we have a realistic view of what I'm doing, what partner's doing. Or if you say, I have to have equity and I can't get it any other way, then you may try to find equity with a different partner. Okay. All right, now what about equity specifically with childcare and household tasks? Okay. We mentioned this earlier in the semester when I asked you to think about what percentage of various things you wanted to do and what percentage you'd want a partner to do. This is sort of a new phenomenon in our culture. In previous generations, it was expected that one parent would work and the other parent would stay home with the kids. Or, one spouse would work and the other spouse would do the cooking and the cleaning and things. Okay. Today, you have more and more situations where both partners are working outside of the home. And we still tend to see this second shift where women tend to be working especially hard at things like household tasks and childcare, and you can see there can be stress and conflict associated with that. I find this a little bit entertaining. About the baby needs a fresh diaper, and I change the baby 72% of the time, and your PDP, poopy diaper percentage, is at an all-time low. Okay, so I have heard fathers say, I don't do diapers, I don't change diapers. And that always makes me scoff and laugh a little bit. Like, okay. But you have to think about who's going to get up in the middle of the night with the baby, who's going to change the diapers, or you have to think about who's going to fix the things around the house and do the laundry. You and your partner have to decide what equity looks like for you. It may be different from every other couple, that's fine. You have to decide, I'm going to do this and you're going to do that, and we're both happy with this, okay? So perhaps having experiences with your past roommates could teach you at least what not to do, but hopefully what to do to make this work, okay? Last few things before we wrap up today, talking about commitment. We talked about commitment before as being one of those 3 building blocks to a relationship. So we talked about passion, intimacy, and commitment. So commitment is a viewpoint. It's an attitude an intention to continue a relationship. It's a belief, but that belief will then impact your behavior. People will behave differently in a committed relationship than they would if they were not committed. So if you're committed, you expect that relationship to continue, and therefore you will make decisions with that goal in mind. Thinking about, in the future, where do I want to live? What kind of career do I want to do? Etc. You're not just thinking about yourself, but you're also thinking about your partner as well. Now, we said that commitment tends to be low in our culture, and I think that's because we are in an individualistic culture where we don't tend to place as much value on other people and on their outcomes. We tend to focus more on our own outcomes, but our relationships will do better if we consider not just ourselves, but our partners also. And when you're committed to another person, I like this, you're psychologically attached. So that when your partner feels happy, you feel happy too. It's almost like if something goes well for your partner, you feel like you won too. And if someone hurts your partner, you feel hurt too. And because of that, this hopefully will then allow you to care for your partner well in a way that it benefits both of you. That you are, in a way of thinking, not two individuals anymore, but one. You're united, you're connected. And so because of that, you will want to make your partner happier because it makes you happier too, right? Now, what causes us to feel committed? The investment model says there are 3 things to think about here. Satisfaction increases commitment. I think this is obvious, but I think we should take a look at this for a second. If I'm happy with you, I want to stay with you forever. I get that. That's natural. That's normal. But then what's the flip side of this? I'm not happy, so I don't want to be with you. I think we should be cautious here because I think our own personal level of happiness is tied to a lot of different things, not just our relationship. And I think that we should be cautious saying, you're not making me happy anymore, so I'm going to upgrade to the new model. I think we should remember that satisfaction can come back. We can get that satisfaction back if we put the effort and the work into it, right? Alternatives of high quality decrease commitment. If you feel like you can do better elsewhere, that will be in the back of your mind. You'll always be thinking, well, if I need to, I can find another partner. There's nothing I can do to try to convince you that your alternatives are not high quality. Maybe you do have some high quality alternatives. I think the best thing to do here would be to focus on the quality of the person that you're with, to focus on the good things about the partner that you do have, right? And then investments in a relationship increase commitment. What do you invest in a relationship? You put in time, you put in energy, you put in effort. So maybe you say, well, we have kids together, or maybe we have a business together, or maybe you literally have investments like money, financially, that kind of thing. Those are the things that cause you to perhaps say, I've put a lot into this relationship, so I want to try to stay and get the best outcome that I can, right? So essentially what we're saying is that people stay with their partners when they're happy. That would be ideal, right? When there's no place else to go or it would cost too much to leave. That's kind of sad. That's kind of depressing. And I told you the last section was going to be more optimistic, but it's not all sunshine here, okay? There's no place else to go. This kind of harkens back to the idea that we feel like we can't do better elsewhere. And I've mentioned this before, but I think this really does say that we're afraid to be alone, that we're willing to stay with the partner we're with until somebody better comes along. And if nobody better comes along, we'll just stay where we are. I think that means we're not really valuing the person that we're with if we're always looking for something better. And I think that means that we are too concerned about being in a relationship. I wouldn't say that being in a bad relationship is better than being single. So I would just encourage you to think about that. And then it would cost too much to leave. Maybe you say, I've invested too much, I've put too much time, I've put in the best years of my life, right? To say that maybe you've put in too much money, etc., and so you feel like you can't leave. So this then leads us to the idea that people could be committed for different reasons, and therefore there are different types of commitment. So personal commitment, this is what we're going to call it, when people want to stay in a relationship. They desire the relationship, they want to keep it. That's ideal, obviously. But then we can also have a constraint commitment, where they feel like they have to stay together. Maybe they feel like they have to stay together because maybe they can't provide for kids if they're not together. or maybe they're concerned about how it would impact the kids if they were to split up. Or for any other number of reasons, perhaps you feel like you have to stay. You wouldn't have what you needed if you left. But then also there's a moral commitment. And I think this would be a really interesting conversation if we were in the classroom to have with you guys. Do you feel like we still have this? And to what extent do we still have this? But the idea that we ought to continue a relationship. Maybe I don't feel like it. And maybe I don't have to. But I made a promise. This is that idea that we made a vow. If you got married, you made a vow. And then if we don't have this anymore, then should we change the way we do vows? I had one student tell me once that someone she knew was getting married, and they were going to change the vows from "till death do us part" to "as long as we make each other happy." Which, I get that you want to be happy, and I hope you make each other happy, but you can't make each other happy all the time. Like, that's an unrealistic expectation here. So, do we have this idea that vows matter or not? And if this is not the case, then should we change the way we do marriage ceremonies, perhaps? Just a thought. All right, last thing here, this is really a preview of our last lecture, talking about some things that go along with being committed, and we'll talk about a lot more in the last chapter. But just 3 that are mentioned here. When you are committed, you will be more likely to put in the effort into a relationship. One thing here, it talks about accommodation. This is your partner upsets you, and you take a break, take a breath, calm down, and then respond the best way you can, instead of having that immediately defensive or attacking back. Because you care about this person, maybe you say, well, we need to have this conversation, but we need to be calm. Let's be calm first. Let's take a break before we have this conversation, right? Willingness to sacrifice. Why would you put the needs of somebody else ahead of your own if you're not committed to that relationship and you don't think you're going to be with that person long term? Like, you probably wouldn't do that. But if you are committed, you may know you're committed, know you love this person because you're willing to sacrifice for them. And then one more, and we will talk about more in the last lecture, but perceived superiority. This can be obnoxious to the people outside of the relationship, but people inside of a relationship saying, our relationship is better than everybody else's. Now, this is a perception. It might be. You might have the best relationship ever, or you might not. But having that perception will then cause you to not be interested in other alternatives. You're not looking for other partners. You're not trying to do better elsewhere because you think you have the best. So this could be good for your relationship, even if other people find that obnoxious. All right. So that is the end of our lecture video for this week. So remember that we do have activity 11 that's due by Friday at 5 p.m. If you've already completed 10 activities, there's no benefit to your grade to completing that, although you can if you want to. But if you've missed activities, you want to use your drop grades for the ones you've already missed. So I would encourage you to do activities 11 and 12 if you need to. Let me know if you have any questions. I hope you guys are doing well, and I will talk to you in our next and last lecture video. You guys have a great day.